Alright, so let's see what we got going on here. This is a demonstration of how to do some render settings and make sure that they work. The thing is, on the original version, we were using a different way to take our light, our materials, our cameras, and create a final scene. So for this project, what we need to do, and it's very similar to what we talked about on Monday, is we need to actually implement a different render engine. And when I say render engine, hopefully this starts to make more sense to you over time. It basically means that we're going to tell the computer to use a certain methodology to turn our creation into a rendition that can be appreciated without having to open up any tools at all. It's a PNG or a JPG, and you don't have to open up 3ds Max to do it. So what we're going to do here is we're going to use a couple of things. One of them is the render settings dialog, and you can press F10 if you have the F key, or it's the teapot with the gear next to it to get into render settings. We're also going to be using some physical materials, again like we did on Monday, and that's very akin to what we're going to be using on the Unreal Engine, is physically based rendering materials. And a couple of settings that were set up for an older version of this, this is the 2017 activity that we started with, is we're going to disable the advanced lighting, we're going to turn off the skylight that they've got, and basically some automatic exposures. So here we go. A couple different ways for you to get into it. If you don't see the teapot at the top, hopefully you can get to F10. Otherwise, under the render menu, that's a third way to get to it. Find render settings. And whatever the defaults were, make sure you go to an iterative process and select the art render. Now, since we're on the art render, we want to go to the tab and move it up a little bit from draft. This is a really cool thing to do. Set your time limit to like 5 minutes on a render. So it's a progressive or iterative render, and as things might take longer than 5 minutes if you went for max quality, you don't want to end up taking up all your time just rendering out a scene. End of the year, we can talk about optimizing renders. Let's just get that set up for now. Now that we're going to use the art render, we need to make sure that this scene can be processed in a way that it's viewable. And so what we're going to do is we're just going to create a simple placeholder to hold some material. Very much like this step-by-step is going to have you build a building and then add a couple of modifiers to it. Work with different versions to create this building. Yeah. Alright, so a simple box. And I'm not trying to recreate the tutorial here. This is just a piece of geometry that we can flop some physical materials on and just make sure that the render is viewable. So adding some segments because it a little bit more closely aligns with what you're going to be doing in your tutorial. Remember F3 to make those facets show up. So I'm just grabbing from the material editor, touch M on your keyboard. I'm going to grab a standard type. And by the way, the Wednesday activity, you'll get into the shaders and some of those messages in the background about OSL will start to make sense after Wednesday. But for now, let's stay focused on this. We're going to assign a material to give that building the properties akin to that physical material. And so with those changes, if we render, we see it's way too bright. There's just, you can't see it, kind of washed out. And the reason that that's going on is that we're processing an element known as a sky or sunlight, and it's using that as an environment map. And not to get too lost in it, but an environment map can provide some really cool reflective qualities around your scene. But in this case, it's overdriving what we're trying to get done. We're ending up with too much light in our scene, and the whole scene's washed out. Alright, to get to that, we're going to get into our environment settings. You can actually touch 8 on your keyboard to get in there. And let's talk about a couple things here. There's our booger. It's using this calculation. We're just going to switch over to, well, we're going to use a bitmap. And I'm going to put these up on the game programming drive in an area for you. We're just going to pick some kind of a background that might be suitable for placement of a building prototype. And we want to then see what's going on when we use this image rather than using the sun and sky as the environment. You could choose any one of those images out there, and depending on the placement of the angle of your camera, some might make sense than others. So we're going to re-render this out, see with a different environment. And I don't know how well you can see it. It's there, but it's really dark. So the next setting we're going to talk about is the exposure setting. And the exposure setting is something that comes to play again when you're at time of rendering, and it's going to determine how the light is being interpreted. You can say through a camera lens. We're going to just use the default, the automatic. We're also going to disable the advanced lighting because, well, you can make some beautiful combinations with reflections, lights, materials, and cameras. We're going to stop worrying about bouncing lights all over the place, and we're just going to go with an automatic exposure control. And so this render is, well, the camera angle is not optimal, but you can see the basic building. This one doesn't have any complexity to it, but the environment map ends up looking like a background or a setting for it. And this results in providing you with an example of a render that's visible. So your modeling that you've done with the building, which brought together a number of skills that we've used in the past, can amount to a more decent scene. I think you'll be much happier with it. So those of you who have completed your modeling, and that would be the first building, which is done with polygon editing, the second one, which is Boolean editing, and then your third building of your type, you can end up with a more finished result by doing it.